Okay, my name is Jason Culbertson. I'm president of Insight Education Group. I want to give you just literally 2 minutes about Insight Education Group before we jump into the coaching. We work internationally and across the U.S. We have had the opportunity to work with QRTA for the last 2.5 years on the Advanced Leadership module. And working with principals across Jordan, and we have a few of the QRTA folks in the audience today, so welcome to you. At Insight, we focus on 3 what I would consider areas that are all interrelated. One of those areas is school improvement, one is leadership development, and one is teacher growth. I think our topic today, instructional coaching, illustrates the interconnectedness of those 3. Because if you think about the idea of instructional coaching, you can see the applicability for teacher growth, but leadership development and also school improvement. The way that I would like to start today, like I start several sessions, some of you may have seen this one before, I like to start with a children's book to try to illustrate a point. And so the name of our book that we're going to read together today is Old MacDonald's Farm. I'm going to read it, but I'm going to tell you the question that I'm going to ask you at the end of the book is going to be, if our topic is instructional coaching, why would I choose this book to read? So I'm previewing the question. If our topic today is coaching for instructional change, why would we start with this book? So let's read it. Once upon MacDonald's farm. While it is true that MacDonald had a farm, it wasn't much of a farm, and he had no animals, none at all. I really must have some animals. So he bought an elephant, and he also bought a baboon and a lion. In the morning, MacDonald and the elephant went out to the field to do the plowing. Much later that afternoon, there were still some chores to be done. There were eggs to gather, milking to do. MacDonald was weary and went to bed early. But while he was sleeping, the animals decided to leave, and so they did, without a sound. When MacDonald awoke, he had no animals, but his neighbor offered to help. That evening, he sent over a horse, a cow, and a chicken. MacDonald was thankful for his new animals. So after a good sleep and a healthy breakfast, he was eager to start work. He had eggs to gather, the milking to do, but first, the plowing. Take about 2 minutes with someone close by, shoulder partner. Why? Why would I start a session on instructional coaching with this Old MacDonald book? Take about a minute with a shoulder partner to answer the why question. Okay, what are a few things that you discuss with your partner? What is the why? Why start with this on instructional coaching? Well, it is a fun way and it is a hook, but what do we glean from this story? What's the moral of this story compared to this idea of instructional coaching? Okay, here's one thing we heard up front. Use the right person for the right job. What else? And if you guys could speak it a little louder, just so that everybody could hear, and we don't have a second mic. At some point, you got to get started, right? So you can sort of analyze, but at some point, we have to start somewhere. Yes? Absolutely. This session is about coaching for instructional change. In the end, he had the right tools, he had the right animals, but he didn't apply those correctly. So at first, though, he didn't even have the right tools. But then when he got the right tools, he didn't use those in the right way. And so what was the result? He was plowing with a chicken. So one quick story on plowing with a chicken. I used this a few years ago with about 5,000 principals across an entire state. And after a few months, that became part of what they would say whenever they were not using tools in the most efficient way. They would say, well, I feel like I'm plowing with a chicken. Kamal, you had a point? Think about that. That's an excellent point, Kamal. I'm glad you said that, because think about this. When he didn't have the right animals, or when he was using the incorrect tools, they left. They went away. But what did his neighbor do? Well, he gave him the right tools. So now let me ask, what did his neighbor not do? How to use it. His neighbor didn't come and show him and model for him how to use the right tools. So his neighbor, it was great that he gave him the tools, but he didn't model how to use those tools. And the result, we're plowing with a chicken. Same result, exactly. It's the same, absolutely. Okay, thanks for indulging me on that. It is a sort of a fun way to start, a good hook, but also has a few lessons for our topic today on instructional coaching. So here's what I would like to do today in our time together. I would like for us to be a community of learners over the next 75 minutes. I want to define and operationalize instructional coaching. I want to give you an example, a specific example, actually show a second example as well of a process or a tool for coaching that I'd like you to analyze where your current building is, your current organization, whether it's multiple schools, one school, where you are with that tool, and then think through some action steps for moving forward in a similar coaching model, if you would like. Anybody familiar with this graphic by Simon Sinek? Yes. So anybody remember the name of this graphic? The golden circle. Very good. So the golden circle starts with the why, moves out to the how, and then has the what. So my goal in the next little bit is to sort of follow the same path as the golden circle. And I'd like to start with the why of instructional coaching, then move out to the how of instructional coaching, and then lastly the what of instructional coaching before then we get to the application part of today and you start to analyze where you are based on a model similar to this one. I want to be super upfront and name one thing, and that is we're going to look at a couple models today. These are examples. There are many right ways to do this. So I am not here saying that it needs to be done exactly this way. I am here saying it needs to be done. There are many ways to do it, and here's an example or two. Okay. One-on-one coaching. So let's talk about this for a moment. There was a recent meta-analysis from researchers from Harvard and Brown University, and they looked at all different types of professional development. And when we say professional development, let's contextualize that a bit. What we mean is your professional learning communities, or PLCs, where you bring groups of teachers together. What we mean is your, what we call staff development, or your professional development, where you bring your entire faculty together around a specific topic. That meta-analysis showed that the number one lever, the number one impact of all the different types of professional development for teachers, one-on-one coaching. However, the caveat to that would be these four characteristics. That it's individualized, it's intensive, it's sustained, and it's context specifically focused. So what I'm trying to do, again, just a quick reminder, golden circle, I'm trying right now to give you the why behind instructional coaching. We can, let's talk through these. Let's talk what, yeah, let's talk about each one for a second. Let's talk about individualized. I think that one probably is super straightforward in that it is sort of that one-on-one, that it's not in a group setting, that someone has observed your lesson, or maybe not a lesson, maybe it's a PLC, a leader of a PLC, maybe it's a principal that's getting coaching, but that it's individualized. The intensive means that we're going deep, we're not staying superficial. It's not, for example, you go into classes and you see behavioral problems. So you could coach on behavior, but oftentimes behavior is a symptom of an underlying instructional problem. So you're trying to use, whether it's the 5 whys technique or some type of root cause analysis, to really get to the core of the issue. Sustained, it's not an event. It's not a one-time thing. So we hear from a lot of schools and teachers, and we ask, hey, have you been coached one-on-one? And they say, yeah, once a semester. Yeah, that's what we hear. And then so, well, that's not really sustained. And we're going to get to that more. In the model that I'm going to show you, it really needs to be an ongoing process. And we'll talk more about other things that we want to see from that as well. Context specifically focused. What that means is if we really want to go deep, right, and if you think about Elmore's instructional core with task, and this is more difficult in certain situations, but if the coach doesn't have any type of grasp of the context or the content, they can coach on pedagogy, but if they can't connect that to content, there's only so deep, that the coach, you can make progress for sure, but there's only so deep that you can go if you don't know the content of what you're coaching. What I'd like to do is try to operationalize a little bit about that. Well, yeah, we'll fix the table, no big deal. Put yourself in the shoes of somebody being coached. Think about yourself. If someone was coaching you, think about this for a moment. What do you want and what do you not want from that coaching experience? So those are going to be your 2 questions that you're going to turn and talk for a bit on. And then we're going to share out, we're going to chart those up. Because the reason I want to chart those up is as we start to look at the models, the examples, I want us to come back and see if those models honor what we put up that we want or what we don't want from a coaching session. So again, put yourself in the shoes of the person being coached, not the person doing the coaching. At your table, start making a list of what you want from a coaching session and what you don't want from a coaching session. And let's take about 4 to 5 minutes on what you want and what you don't want from a coaching session. Okay, let's come back together. I know that you haven't totally finished those conversations. I wish we could spend more time on that because those are very rich conversations. But let's share out a few things. Let's start with what we want from a coaching conversation. Yes?
From experience. So when I was in this experience, I did 1, 2, 3. As opposed to saying, you should do 1, 2, 3. So telling me their story, as opposed to telling me what to do, would be helpful for me.
Experience, I appreciate that addition. Let's take a second to look at what we have here. So we have both experience and evidence is what we want. You also gave us a don't want, and I'm going to add that because we're going to see that in a moment, the word should. The word should coming from a coach. We're going to look at a few words. We're going to look at a few words in a little bit that in coaching you want to try to avoid. And should is going to be one of those words. So thanks for bringing that out. What else do you want? So we've got experience, but based on evidence. What else do you, again, you're the person being coached. What else do you want from that session? Yes? They're listening. Can I add one word? Can I add active listening? So that and I think that's what you mean by a good listener. They're an active listener. Great. What else? Yes.
Specific constructive sessions.
Oh, I like those two words, specific and constructive. By the way, 2 quick points. I'm going to apologize for my handwriting. It is terrible. Okay, I am sorry. Other point that I did mean to bring up in the very beginning, totally forgot. This PowerPoint will be uploaded on the TSF website, by the way, so as we go through, feel free to take pictures, but just know it'll be uploaded. So sorry, I should have mentioned that earlier. What else do you want out of a coaching session?
To be realistic.
To be enthusiastic? Realistic, yes, to be realistic. And, maybe to paraphrase a little bit about what I think, and push back if this is not what you mean, but when we're talking about a coaching session, especially with people early in a career, whether that's a teacher or an early career principal or an early career director, that there's only so much we can do in a coaching session to, instead of trying to be very broad with a lot of unrealistic goals, to get very specific that we said before and realistic. Does that paraphrase?
Exactly, and also sometimes people doesn't know situation.
Okay, so I'm going to paraphrase you one more time if you'll let me, and I'm going to add with realistic that as a coach coming in, you need to know the context of the place that you're in, whether that's a classroom or a school building, but you need to understand the context. Absolutely. What else? What else? Let me see. Who have I not heard from? I haven't heard from you. Go ahead.
I would start with wanting to know, to have a clear vision of what I'm supposed to get from the coaching session. And when I want to go back to experience, when we're talking about experience, I would look for practical experience rather than theoretical experience.
One of the things I think experience allows us to do is sometimes ground things in stories, right? The story piece. But before experience, you said, I'm sorry, what was the first point? A vision. Purpose, great word. Purpose and where's this conversation going? Absolutely. Did you have a point? Yes.
I think he should be a bit patient.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. The coaching process that we're going to look at in a moment is going to require patience because the model that I'm going to show you, the example, it's based on questions. And what do we know about asking questions in any situation, even to students? You got to give wait time. You can't ask, especially if it's a deep conceptual question, you can't ask a deep conceptual question and expect a quick response. Because if you do, you'll get a superficial response. So patience is going to be key. What else? Yes?
I think before the session even starts, I'd like them to learn how I already coach, so they know what to focus on, what I'm good at, what I'm bad at.
So I am going to add not only context of the building and maybe the students that you have, but also if you were coached previously, what did you focus on? So they come in knowing maybe if you had areas of strength and areas you were trying to grow in, what were those? And do they know that coming in? That's a great point. Let's do one more. Yes?
On the right time, on the right place.
Tell me a little more about what you mean by the right time and the right place.
It's not like just on the agenda. On this week, you have a coaching session. It has to be on the right time. That's based on needs.
Okay, needs-based.
Yes. It's all about the privacy.
Did I hear you say privacy?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. So it needs to, privacy is sort of, it's nested. There's a lot of things with privacy that we can unpack. Number one, you got to feel safe. I'm going to add that word beside privacy because to me there's a certain aspect of, if I'm coaching you, and yeah, let's say that it was a tough lesson. You have to be confident and comfortable. I'm not going to be out telling everybody that, oh my goodness, that was an awful lesson. Da, da, da. You have to be comfortable with that. So privacy, and we're going to add safety, or it's a safe place. Okay. What about, let's switch to a second to the negative. Some of these positives, their negatives are sort of obvious, right? So active listener, passive, or even not a listener at all, not even paying attention, unspecific, not realistic, outside of context. You don't understand how the session's structured. You don't see the vision. Being impatient, not allowing the person to ask questions, not being based on your needs, and obviously not feeling safe. Are there any other, so let's take those off. Are there any other don't wants that are not connected to one of these? Yes.
For someone to judge me.
Yes. It's not supposed to be, a coaching session should be a safe place. It should be a judgment-free zone, right? So we don't want judging. I'm going to add, let me add one word, and then I'll come back around, because sometimes this word doesn't come up. It may be a little bit difficult to sort of translate, so here goes. Gotcha. Does that translate? So it's kind of short for I got you, but gotcha. A coaching session should, yeah, it's a fun word. A coaching session should never be a gotcha. Yeah, so yeah, in my accent, it's I got you, but gotcha. And I'll even spell it out for you. It's something like that, G-O-T-C-H-A. Let me tell you a story from my first year teaching. This is why coaching is so important to me. My very first year teaching, first year teacher, what is that, 21 years old. I am teaching. I'm in the middle level, right? And so I'm teaching away, and we're doing a literacy lesson, and I'm sweating, and I'm doing everything I can do. And the assistant principal walks into the room to do an observation. She was not the only one that came in the room. Out of the corner of the room, a little mouse came out. Well, he peeked his little head out. Then he proceeded to run around the desk of the students. Anybody taught middle level? Okay. Mouse comes out, you may as well stop the show. Well, at any level, yeah. I mean, I feel like middle, yeah. So any level. So mouse comes out. Mouse steals the show. Students are standing on their desks. I mean, trust me, I don't want the mouse on me either, but I'm not going to stand on the desk. But students are on their desk. Everybody's screaming. So we call the custodial support to come into the room. Custodial support comes into the room. He proceeds to sort of look at the mouse, and he's almost tracking the mouse's movements, right? It was almost like this algorithmic thing that the mouse was moving in this pattern. And the custodian, and the kids are all watching, he proceeded, after he had figured out this super complex, like, mouse movement, he proceeded to do that. Then, I'm not done yet, to pick up the mouse by the tail, toss him in the garbage can, and walk out. Okay? Meanwhile, the person observing me, still writing down everything going on. You know, we have a flat mouse. Now it's in the trash can. It was totally my fault. Then proceeded to score that lesson, to give me ratings for that lesson, and then try to have a coaching session about that lesson. You know, and one of the questions, what would you have done differently? I would have not had a mouse in the class, is what I would have done differently. That's my story on gotcha, personal story. That's why I actually take this very personally, and I always want to make sure that we don't confuse coaching with being a gotcha or judging or those sort of things. I saw several hands before my mouse story. Yes?
Tell me how to analyze and find the answer.
So help you get to a solution.
Yes.
Yes.
Not
so,
give me the solution all time.
Oh,
but
yeah.
helping me to find the solution.
I couldn't have said that. Perfect way to put that. The coach is not there to tell you a solution. They're there to help you find a solution. So what do we not want? We don't want just telling. You know, and that sort of goes up to should. You know, oh, you should have done this, should have done that. Yes. Oh. Absolutely. It's absolutely options. Oh, that's what, oh, sorry, that's what we want. It's not one size fits all. Okay, let's do one more not. Come on. Yeah, that's exactly right. What you don't want is the coach doing all the talking. Oh, good one, good word. Yeah, this is not a time for a show off. or a bunch of stories, right? Like you can have some, like you can have the most germane, the most like, you know, the ones that are relevant, but not a bunch of stories and not a show off. That's terrible handwriting. I do apologize, everybody, for that handwriting. Okay, so we have got a pretty comprehensive list now going of what we want and what we don't want from a coaching session. So as we move through and I show you an example, I want us to come back to this as we talk through this next coaching session of, as I describe this particular example, does it meet our criteria for what we want and not want from a coaching session? You know, I've done this a few times. Let's see if we got some of these up here. Aligned to the school's goals, yeah. Evidence-based, specific, we mentioned that. Actionable, safe environment, we definitely mentioned that. Structured, somebody brought that up. I think through the vision and purpose statement, and reflective as well. Some of the things that I hear from what do you not want? Opinions. You know, it's not about opinions. Prescriptions, I think that goes to your point on, you know, you're not telling me, you're not giving me a prescription. You know, this last one, the second to last one, I want to talk about for a moment, because in most of the schools and places that we work, we would say, if you observe something, you should have that follow-up conversation no more than 48 hours after that. Because what's going to happen after 48 hours? Teachers are constantly teaching more lessons, right? If you've ever had to watch a lesson, or as a teacher, teach a lesson, and wait a week to get feedback, think about how many lessons you've taught in that week, right? I mean, at least, what, 25 lessons? And then you can't remember one 25 lessons ago. So point being, don't wait too long after the conversation. And again, a lot of our schools and states and districts would say 48 hours. Don't wait more than 48 hours. So what is the purpose? Providing meaningful feedback. We've talked about that. Create an opportunity to the coach and the trainer. A glow and a grow, we're going to come back to that. We've talked about reflection. We've talked about improving the subsequent. So let's get into the how. I'm excited to show you a model. The model that I'm going to show you is one that is used in several states in the U.S. and in schools. I think a total of probably around 700,000-ish teachers use this particular model. So the first part of the model, well, again, here's what it's based on. Instead, and this goes to your point from a moment ago, instead of coming in and being unrealistic and talking about everything that was positive and everything that was negative, we're going to pick one specific glow, also called a reinforcement, also called a positive, but just one. We're going to do the same for the grow or the refinement, one. Now, some of you may want to push back on me with this one. You may say, I got a first-year teacher. They've got to fix 7 things. And I would say, that's a true statement. But this is going to make you, as a coach, number one, prioritize. Did I hear you say priority? Absolutely. It's going to make you, as a coach, prioritize and look for the highest leverage areas. In other words, what could we solve? What could we focus on with this teacher that would have impact on other aspects of their instruction? So one specific glow and one specific grow. So let's jump into it. All right. Yes. Depth, not breadth, right? Because this is superficial. And the reflective questions, I'm so glad we have that up there. The reflective questions, if I just tell you, you're not going to internalize it. But if I, and we'll see this in a moment, if I ask you questions, and through the questions, you have a, quote, aha, that's yours now. That's not my aha, that's your aha. Let's start out with the introduction. Let me ground this in a little bit of context. Let me also, I'm gonna name something right now. This coaching model does take some time. It will take time. However, my goal in the first few slides was to present the why in such a case that this is one of the most effective ways to spend your time working with teachers. So if you know that, if that's what the research says, this is one of the most effective ways, I'm going to say maybe that's a good investment of time. Maybe you'll get a good return on the time investment that you put into this process. So contextually, these conversations could range from around 25 to 30 minutes on the low end and around 45 to 55-ish minutes on the high end. Let's start there. Why is this not a 10-minute conversation? You tell me. Why is it a red flag? Why is it a problem if you could have a coaching conversation in 10 minutes? Superficial. Why is it a problem if it's 3 hours? Well, yeah, it's boring, and you've overwhelmed. Somebody's overwhelmed. In fact, everybody's overwhelmed, not just somebody. Everybody's overwhelmed. So you have to read body language and all those things as a coach. But here's the first part. It's an introduction, and it starts by, you know, one of the things that we said, let me connect back here. You want a vision and purpose? One of the first things you're going to do is you're going to establish the vision and purpose for the coaching session in the introduction. We're going to meet this afternoon for a few minutes. We're going to focus on this lesson. We're going to start with an area of strength or a glow, and then we're going to talk about an area of refinement that we could call a grow, and then we'll talk about next steps. We're establishing a purpose in the very beginning, and we're going to ask a general impression question. There's no right question to ask here, but I'm going to tell you a question I've been using for about, longer than I want to count, a lot of years to start the conversation, and it's as simple as you can imagine. How do you think that lesson went? Or if I'm observing a principal, how do you think that leadership team meeting went? Because what I want to do is just simply get them talking. How do you think it went? And then they're going to tell me. So let me share some practical experience for a moment. Your strongest teachers, your strongest, best teachers are immediately going to tell you what they did wrong. Your weakest teachers are going to tell you how great it was. How do you think it went? Great. Best lesson ever that you came in and saw. Yeah, well, yeah, it was just phenomenal. It was great, right? So obviously, then we might ask, well, what made it great? And then we get them talking. But here's the point, okay? As a coach, when you see the other sections, you want to be really listening, actively listening to what you're hearing on that general impression question, because not only are you coaching in the moment, but you're also thinking about how to work with this person over a sustained amount of time. So what you're looking for also is there a disconnect in their understanding of good instruction, right? Because let's talk about for a moment, does anybody have or work with teachers that might fall into that latter category of maybe they're not the strongest, but they say, how'd the lesson go? Fantastic. Okay, so let's unpack that for a second, because there's two reasons that happens. One reason is there's a true disconnect in understanding of instruction. And that is, in some ways, easier to work with than the other example. And the other example is they're just not reflective at all, right? So anybody familiar with Carol Dweck's work on growth and fixed mindset? This question is an excellent question to kind of get a feel for where are we on the growth and fixed mindset, okay? Because if it's excellent, what made it excellent? Well, the kids just did an excellent job. What? And so you sort of get in this almost looping pattern of questions. That's telling you this person is not reflective. It's also, just to be super honest with you, when that happens, it's going to be a long 30 minutes, okay, of trying to get someone who's not reflective to reflect. So bring a thing of water and like some Tylenol or aspirin or something, because it's going to be a long. So well, let's get to that. That's a perfect segue. Let's talk about that. The first day after this general impression question, we want to, and we've let them talk, right? The teacher or whomever we're coaching has gone through, and they've told us, here's how the lesson went in their opinion. We're going to start with an area of strength, what we call reinforcement or a glow. And in our minds as a coach, we're going to have a goal for that, because what we've then done is we've pre-written questions to try to get them to self-reflect. Let me stop for a moment and ask you this. Why do you think as a coach it would be important to at least, I'm going to say write down, but to at least think through your reflective questions for the teacher? Why is that important? Absolutely. So one of the things that we want to do with the teacher is ask reflective questions. In other words, we don't want to tell them, we want them to reach that conclusion. So as a coach, what I am saying and what I do is I actually think through my questions very specifically, and I write them down. And I almost write them in such a way that, now I've sort of like modeled my metacognition on getting ready for a coaching session that some of you have had to endure. But I almost write them in such a way that it's almost like a tree. So I ask my question, if the answer is this, here's my question. If the next answer is this, here's my question. So there's sort of almost like a game theory to it, right, of anticipating a response and having another question. So when I go into a coaching session for reinforcement, I usually have 6 or 7 questions at least pre-written, but then I know that we're going to move beyond those. We're going to get off script, but I at least have the first few written out that I've really thought through. Why is that important? That was a long way to rephrase that question. Why is that important? Why do that? Why not just go in with no questions and just start asking questions? Yes. Absolutely. So to me, that's like going in and teaching a lesson with no lesson plan. And maybe some people can do it. I can't. I find this for me to be incredibly difficult, because I just want to tell people things, because that's much more efficient and it's quicker, and you can do that in 5 minutes. This takes time. So I have to really think through those questions ahead of time, so I'm not trying to make all of them up in the moment. Yes, sorry. Yeah, this is after. This is sitting down after we've done an observation. Sorry. So this would be, we've observed a lesson, and then we sit down. And in that sit down, this is all the sit down. So the first thing, all after. And we can talk about things to do before as well, because there is definitely ways to coach up front, front-loading coaching, but this is all after coaching. So again, so you're sort of doing the greeting, you're establishing the purpose and the vision, and then we're doing the reinforcement or the glow. Yes? Absolutely. You just want to structure your questions to get at that, right? So you want to structure your questions to get to the positive. Let me ask this question. Why are we starting with the positive? Why? To set the tone, to make it positive. Is that what you were going to say as well? Oh, that's a really good one. It sort of opens up people's ears. So I've never heard when you're telling people what they've done well, I've never heard anybody sort of tune out and say, I don't want to hear that. People tend to like to hear what is a relative strength. Absolutely, but here's the thing. That's definitely one side of it, but there's another major side to the reinforcement, and that is it's a relative strength of the lesson that if we can, people, exactly what you said, people like to hear what they've done well. If we sort of shine a light on something that is done well, what are we more likely to see? We're likely to see that same behavior again and again and again. So it's more than just, there is definitely, it sets a good tone, absolutely. But it also allows you to talk through an area and to highlight an area that you will probably, a good practice that you will start to see repeated again and again and again by the teacher. So it's more than, like our phrase would be touchy-feely. It's more than just touchy-feely. There's a definite reason why you're starting with this area and why you're picking out something that is a relative strength. One of the things that you guys said was being, I thought, yeah, specific. You said specific right here. Look at the third bullet. When you go into a coaching session, you better have detailed notes so that when you're talking about a strength, provide specific examples of the strength. Don't just say, hey, you asked great questions. Questions were great. That's not really reinforcing. But if you can say, when you ask the question of why is, X integer more than Y, that sort of thing, when you ask that, when you had them comparing and contrasting A, B, and C, that's the type of specificity that's going to help us move a coaching session forward versus just general overarching feedback. And then lastly, simply just recommendations for continued use and feedback from the teacher. So again, being an active listener, you're getting their feedback. So this gives us a chance to just say, if it's questioning and asking higher level questions or critical thinking skills, you name it, what are some ways this would look at upcoming lessons, right? So we've talked about this critical thinking with students or grouping students so their groups are interdependent on one another. Think about an upcoming lesson. How's that going to look when you teach A, B, and C? So you're already priming them to start thinking about how to take that and integrate it into an upcoming lesson. So that's the reinforcement. Yes? Oh, sorry.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, but I think there is a big difference between observing the lesson and sitting with a teacher for feedback session and coaching. Based on my understanding, coaching has to be like on the long term and establishing the goal before.
It absolutely could be. It could be, for sure. So there are different ways to look at coaching. One is, one model of coaching is you have one long-term goal. Absolutely. This coaching model is a little bit more, I would use the word nimble, in that it is long-term, and you're going to go in multiple times, and to the point that I think somebody brought up in the back of, you're going to know what this teacher is working on, and you may give feedback in that area, but if there's another high leverage area of strength or weakness, you're going to provide focused feedback on that. So that's why I said, absolutely. That's why I mentioned in the beginning that there are multiple different coaching models for sure. This is just one that I've seen over the years be effective, but not the only one. And I think there are pieces of all of them that you could take and put together.
Can I just ask, going back to what he said? So when you observe the lesson, you observe and then you decide what to coach on, or do you have maybe a goal before you actually observe the lesson?
Yeah, so again,
because sometimes there's like a whole, this year we're focusing on reflection in the classroom. So you may have something beforehand?
Mm-hmm. So you certainly could. Remember, we did say that we want it to be sort of generally aligned with some of the school goals and priorities.
You could just go in there and just see and then decide.
Absolutely. So that's why I use the word, the one word that I would use to describe this model is nimble, flexible, so that you can go in and see a lesson or part of a lesson and use this coaching model with that lesson so that you definitely, if there's a long-term goal or plan, that would be part of the conversation for sure. But this particular model is going to be very centered on the evidence of what you saw in that lesson.
I'm just curious, how long would this last, the whole coaching part? Is this done, or is there... I mean, is there multiple sessions? I mean, like...
Yeah, so exactly.
Or is it 2 sessions, or could you feel like, well, after 2 times, it's done?
Yeah, look, great points. No, don't apologize. Great points from up here. Let me start with that last one. The question of, could you do this 2 times and it's done? The philosophy behind coaching is it's never done. So I want to say that again, because that's a pretty important point. The philosophy behind coaching is it's never done. It is a journey. That's a great metaphor. Everybody, and we'll talk about this at the very end, but everybody needs coaching, right? Sorry? Absolutely, this is sustained. So this is, now when you ask me how often it's happening, I would tell you if we step into the real world for a moment and I were the head of a school, I would differentiate based on where my teachers were. Teachers who need more support get more coaching. Again, because time, I mean, the thing is time, right? There's only a certain amount of time to do the coaching. So where are you going to invest that time? No, those are all great questions. Yes?
I just want to say that it's, everyone needs coaching all of the time because, I'm Australian, I don't need a mic. Sorry. Because, you know, the big thing is also is that if you're doing a job well, to continue doing that job well, somebody has to keep telling you that you're doing the right thing and you're on the right path to do it well. And sometimes I think that, you know, when we talk about coaching students or teachers or whatever, that there's that tendency to focus on what they're not doing well, if that makes sense. And I just think it's so important that, like in my role, I'm a PYP coordinator, so nobody comes in and observes me. And I could go for like 6 months, 7 months, and thinking that I'm doing okay. I probably am because I still have a good job. But, you know, I also need somebody to come in and say, well, you know what, Sandy, you're actually on the right track. You're doing that well, you're doing that right. Because otherwise, I don't know either.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. That's one of our core beliefs, that everybody needs coaching. And I mean, your phrase is all the time. I couldn't agree more. So then all the time just has to balance out with realistically, what time do you have available? And it really is a balance. I mean, absolutely. I mean, there's a tension between the amount of time we have for coaching, but also the need for coaching. Great point. Thank you for making that. Yes. Absolutely.
When we introduce a new type of training, okay, to everybody, after we give the teacher the training for that, we need to go on the field and tell them how to implement what they got in the training. So that's another role.
I think there's a lot to unpack in that. This session is sort of focused on, or this training, our time here together is kind of focused a little narrowly on this coaching meeting that we're talking about. But you raise an excellent point that in a lot of the schools that we work with, there is a coach who, when this conversation is done, might then say, let me come into your room and do a model lesson. So then we're transferring, because look, the coaching is good, but then to follow up the coaching with being able to see sort of a model and then have a talk about the coach's metacognition takes it even up a level for sure. This is probably not going to be a surprise. This is going to seem very familiar to you. In the coaching conversation, we started out with the positives, right? We started out with the reinforcement. We're then going to switch gears a little bit to refinement. So this is our grow. This is where in the conversation that we have watched this lesson or piece of a lesson, we have probably looked at a framework, maybe to ground it in some type of research base in pedagogy, and we have analyzed a high leverage area that needs to grow. And again, I stress high leverage because we want to look for an area that if we improve this area, another area may improve. Let me come back for a moment to classroom management. So often, when I hear people who coach on classroom management, they are coaching on a symptom and not a root cause. In a lot of classrooms that I've been in, watching and observing, and when I see issues with classroom management, you can start to quickly ask why, and get to an answer of student why. Students not engaged. Why are students not engaged? Students maybe can't read on grade level. Maybe the textual reading that we're doing is irrelevant to students' lives. But point being, we can unpack that and very quickly get to instruction. So just a quick piece of advice, don't coach on classroom management. Get down to the root cause of classroom management. But let's look at these for a moment. These are very similar. Oh, the one I just gave. So classroom management, unpack that down to the material the teacher's using is totally irrelevant and meaningless to students' lives, right? So then look at your curriculum. What are you putting in there? It could be. I mean, it could be. Every class is different. But point being, if you sit down and unpack that with the teacher, you're going to get to the root cause. You guys are familiar with Liz City's 5 Whys? So Liz City's a researcher from Harvard. Liz, L-I-Z, last name City, C-I-T-Y, and she has a 5 Whys protocols. It's a root cause analysis protocol, but she incorporates the 5 Whys in a lot of her work. Okay, I will share with you one of the questions that I've used, because again, we don't want to just tell someone, you know, you really need to have students, you know, engaged in higher level thinking. You want them to get to that conclusion. You want to sort of lead them there, but not tell them. One of the best questions I have found for just starting this part of the conversation is a very low-risk question of, if you could teach this lesson again, what's the one thing you would do differently? What does that question do? It's positive, right. It's positive, causes them to reflect. Reflect, is there something else that, let me repeat the question because there's one other nuance of that question. If you could teach this lesson again, what's the one thing you would do differently? It definitely focuses on doing something differently. Is there anything else that question is doing? Yes.
Don't tell him, don't do this, but you tell him, reflect and try to do this session another time without doing mistakes.
Absolutely. We're not being directive, right? We're leaving it open. Anything else that question does?
You're letting him perhaps discover or find whatever it is that he needs to work on his own.
We're absolutely letting him discover, and how are we? We're absolutely doing that, and in a way, we're putting guardrails on that discovery. I'm going to repeat the question one more time, and tell me what the guardrail on the discovery is. If you could teach this lesson again, what's the one thing that you would do differently? Where's the guardrail? One thing. So actually, what I'm trying to do for this teacher is to get them to go through a root cause analysis independently of mine. Because think about that. If somebody asks me, when this session's over and we all leave, and I see my colleague, Jason Stricker, and if he were to coach me and says, hey, what's the one thing you would do differently? It's focusing my mind on the highest leverage thing. So, you know, one thing that I might do differently is, I don't know, there's a lot that I would do differently. Have better handwriting, have a video of coaching for us to watch. There's a lot of things. But what it's going to do is focus me on the one highest leverage. So I am getting the teacher to also, even though they don't realize it, go through the processes of a root cause analysis. Perfect. Yep, see, you just saved me. That's 5 minutes. But you should have said that 5 minutes ago, and we would have saved 5. We could have gotten out early. So, but yeah, he's going deep. He or she is doing a root cause analysis. Absolutely. That's why we're going to use reflective questions. You're exactly right. So it's just like in a class, right? You're going to have teachers who are super reflective. They make your job really easy. In fact, they make this fun. It's fun to have someone who's super reflective, and you're reflecting together, and you feel good about yourself when you leave, and you're patting yourself on the back as a coach. And then you have people who are not reflective, and you're just asking question after question. And to a point, you may have to be directive. I mean, there's some point when you've exhausted all your questions, the person with whom you're speaking is becoming frustrated, and they'll say things like, can you just tell me what you're looking for? At that point as a coach, that's a big red sign. stop the coaching session. Yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe not totally stop, but it is a red flag. When somebody says, tell me what you want me to do, they're transferring ownership from themselves to you. You don't own that class. You don't own the lesson. They do. That's a red flag. So we'll go back and maybe unpack why that's happening. Here's the other thing. Again, you told me it needed to be specific. Look up here. Here are our examples. Again, if it's an area of growth, you need to have examples, right? So if it is just asking, all knowledge recall questions, have those written down. Be able to say that, hey, you asked 12 questions, out of those 11 were knowledge recall. There was nothing higher on Bloom's or depth of learning. And then provide an example on best practice. Be able to think through with them. If you've identified an area that they need to grow on, be able to talk through an example of what that might look like based on best practice. So, yeah, does that require maybe going and doing a little bit of research or talking to a colleague, just sort of running ideas by? Absolutely, but have an idea of what that would look like. And again, that's what takes it, to your point, that's what takes it then from the coaching conversation and transfers it back into the classroom. Closure. Here's something I've picked up along the way. I always end the conversation with this question, because we've just talked about, if you think about where we are in the conversation, we started out with an introduction, ask a general question, then we talked about a strength, then we talked about a weakness. I don't want to end the conversation on a weakness. I want to come back and say, let's think back through this. What were the positive things that you heard me say about your teaching during this conference? And because my point is, and it didn't obviously need to be verbatim, but my point is, I want to end this conversation on a positive note. Okay, let me see how we're, oh, you like that one? Okay, I was thinking about skipping it for time. Okay. Actually, I think we have a little bit of, let's do this. This is a fun one. Let's do this one. It won't take long. We'll do it quickly. But it'll be a chance for us to sort of see what we're thinking about coaching right now. So the important book, right? So basically it's a way to sort of identify what sort of some of the critical attributes of something would be. So here's a line from the important book on the right. The important thing about a spoon is that you can eat with it. It's like a little shovel. You hold it in your hand. You can put it in your mouth. It isn't flat. It isn't hollow, and it spoons things up. But the important thing about a spoon is that you eat with it. So it's, again, pulling the critical attributes, making you summarize and pull the critical attributes out. Let's just take a couple minutes for that the question down here. Let's now contextualize that. Let's forget about spoons and other utensils. Let's contextualize that for coaching for just maybe 2 or 3 minutes. So let's read this out. The important thing about a coaching conversation is blank. It blank. It is blank. It includes blank. But the most important thing about a coaching conversation is blank. How about work as a table on this? Let's invest 4 or 5 minutes as a table to fill in these blanks so far on your background, and then maybe a few things you've heard from this session on coaching to do our important book sentence. Okay, before we come back together and listen to your sentences that you've created, I do want to based on a couple questions, I just want to revisit a couple of points on this. One point is, as we're asking the self-reflection questions, and we're trying to get this teacher to self-reflect, or principal, whomever, trying to get this person to self-reflect to this area of high leverage that we've identified. There is a point when if someone is just not getting that, you're trying, I call it a saturation point. There is a level when someone just reaches a saturation point, and at that point, and you can see this with body language, right? As soon as you see folded arms in a coaching session, now I'm looking to see who's got folded arms in here. As soon as you see folded arms in a coaching session, a very closed body language, it is an absolute barrier, and my advice to you is end the coaching session sooner rather than later. because at that point, nothing that you are trying to do, you're going to accomplish. You know, it's funny because I find a lot of principals specifically will have a coaching session and they'll ask the teacher, while we're on this idea of like the physicalness, they'll ask the teacher to come to their office, and for the coaching session, they'll bring the teacher in and they're sitting at their desk, and usually, right, their chair's a little higher, so they're sitting up and they have that going. But then they'll have a coaching session. What's the problem with that? Why would you do that when it's so much easier to sit beside somebody? Absolutely. Let me share another piece of advice for you on why to sit beside somebody. You do not want to make... so this is the how you were talking about. See, I knew I was going to get there. So let me give you one more piece of advice. We said that this does not need to be judging. It does not need to be, or it doesn't need to be opinionated. It needs to be based on evidence. We said evidence, specific evidence. I've been writing, when I'm in the class, part of my job getting ready for the coaching, I'm writing evidence, right? So if I'm sitting beside you and we're having a coaching session, it's not my opinion, and it's about the evidence on this page. And if your school uses any type of framework, whether it's Danielson, Marzano, Kim Marshall, you name it, whatever framework, one that you created, I always have that as well, because I want the conversation forced back to where is it in evidence, right? Because that makes it less of an opinion. So you're sitting beside and you have your evidence along with a framework. That prevents the conversation from sort of being I think, you think, I think, and it directs it toward evidence and a framework. Thanks for asking those clarifying questions. What's that? Oh, good word for don't. We do not want the coaching session to become a dictatorship. Definitely not. Absolutely not. Let's take a couple examples from your sentences. I'm really excited to hear what you've come up with. Who would like to share? Yes.
The important thing about a coaching conversation is it inspires you to grow. It analyzes, it is reflective, it includes grows and glows, but the most important thing is that it inspires you to grow.
Great. I mean, I heard a lot of great words there, including reflection, specific, and of course, the glow and the grow. Anybody else want to share what they've come up with from our important book? Yes, in the back, or kind of middle.
The important thing about coaching conversation is promoting positive change. It builds, it is targeted, it includes guidance, but the most important thing about coaching conversation is promoting positive change.
Positive change and targeted. That goes right to our specificity piece that we mentioned earlier on. That's great. I would love to hear more, and if you'd like to stay later and share with me some of the ones that you have. I do know that we're coming up pretty close to the end of our session, and there are a few more of the hows that I want to share with you before the end. Okay, let's talk about the two main levers of this coaching model: questions and follow-up, to your point, that if it ends at the coaching session and doesn't go back into the classroom, we haven't moved it far enough. So questions and follow-up are two key levers on this type of coaching. I'm hoping this is what you were kind of asking for with some of the how. So statements to avoid, also falling over tables. I statements. So be very careful about the first person pronoun I, because what does that do? It starts to make it about you as the coach. It's not about you as the coach. It's about the evidence, the framework, and the teacher. So whenever it becomes I, let that be a red flag that something is not right. Also, taking the I problem and combining it with these next two words are also don't do's. I think and I feel. Never in a coaching session, this is going to sound a little weird, should you be thinking or feeling. Okay, but it's again, you definitely don't think in a coaching. It's all based on the evidence, right? So keep the conversation constantly grounded in the evidence. Remember, and you brought up very early on the whole should word. I told you we'd come back to it. Here it is. other words, should have, could have, would have. Oftentimes we hear those connected to I would have, and if, you know, or when I taught this 25 years ago, I did this. You know, sort of irrelevant and really doesn't move the conversation. Here's another key, though. This last one, be very careful of yes or no questions because they stop a conversation. One of the questions that we were talking about here at this table a moment ago was for the teachers who are just not as reflective, and a question to maybe spur their reflection. If how'd this lesson go? Went great. Okay, did all the students master your objective? Is a question I very often ask. If you answer yes to me on that one, I got a question ready to come out, and that question is, how do you know? Simple as that. All of a sudden, that teacher who said yes, it was a great lesson, everybody mastered the objective. As soon as I say, how do you know? Now we're in a coaching conversation because they don't have a canned answer for that one. So anyway, that's just another quick example. Active listening, we've sort of talked around this a little bit, and somebody mentioned active listening. I think it was right here early on. This notion of you're not a passive listener, so you're giving, paraphrasing. I hope that as you've asked questions or given responses, you notice that I've paraphrased your responses as well to the crowd, and then added on to them sometimes, or supplemented some of the responses, and then summarizing the discussion as well. And of course, providing feedback and the reflective questions. And we've talked about body language. I gave you the table example, the folded arms, and you can tell. And especially the more you get to know someone when they've reached a saturation point. And at that point, the coaching session is for all purposes over. Questions. Who should be doing most of the talking in a coaching session? You all know this now. Who? Absolutely the teacher or the person being coached. If you are the coach and you start to feel yourself talking more than, definitely more than 50%, but even more than 25, 30% of the conversation, you're probably talking too much. Sit back and listen. And don't interrupt either. Once somebody's talking, don't interrupt for a question. Always let that person finish. Follow up. There's one other slide that, is there a why question slide? Where'd that go? Okay, it's apparently not a slide, but here's one other thing. In terms of questions, when you think about questions, we talked about yes or no questions. Be a little bit careful of the why question. The what and the how are your friends as questions, as words to put in questions. Why, be careful how you use it, because sometimes it can be taken the wrong way. So how and what always keep the conversation going, but be a little bit more, and I'm not saying don't ask why, but why can sometimes be taken as, think about anybody have children of their own, like kids, and they're like 5 years old, and you're like, yeah, why is the sky blue? Why? And you're like, okay, just stop asking questions, okay? So anybody who has kids definitely gets that one. So just be cognizant of that why question. Just can sometimes be taken the wrong way, so you want to be careful of that one. I want to show you this example because, yes? Could happen. And again, not to say you never use it, but that just know when you're using it and know why you're using it, and make sure that it's not working against you. I know this is tough to see, and I mentioned the PowerPoint will be online. The only reason that I'm showing you this is it's a little bit of a nuanced, different coaching model. It's from Leveraged Leadership. And the reason that I wanted to show you, and this comes back to your point a moment ago, is that after the coaching session, you're writing down the follow-up. You're writing down specifically when you're going to come back and observe again, what the teacher is going to do differently based on the conversation when that's going to happen. So it's a way to sort of promote accountability, both for the coach, but also for the teacher. So again, think about that because a coaching session can be great, but if classroom practice doesn't change, you may as well have not even had it. You wasted everybody's time. I don't want to end on that note. That would be depressing. So The last thing I told you we'd talk about is the what as we run out of time. I have sort of used the context of a classroom and a teacher for most of this session, just because we needed to ground it in some context. But absolutely don't limit yourself to a classroom and a teacher. Think about as if you're a teacher leader, think about when you lead a professional development. You could absolutely use this with the leaders of professional development. I use this with principals and then regional and state level leaders. I do the same thing. I actually have children, 3 daughters. I use this process with them. I start with the positive, then coach them on the negative of what we need to improve. You can use it also with instructional leadership teams as well. We absolutely ran out of time on this, and that's my fault, my apologies. But what I wanted to do at the end, and I'm just going to encourage you maybe the rest of today and as you think about this session to maybe put a little bit of thought behind this, because what I wanted you to do is take what we've discussed today in this example coaching model, think about where your school currently is just with the coaching processes that are in place. Think about where you want to go. Are you already there? Maybe you have a model like this already going at your building. Maybe you don't. But if you wanted to move toward a model like this, what are the major hurdles? But also, in this last question, I think that we forget this last piece way too often in education. Because I think my perception going to thousands of schools, being thousands of schools, is that we always focus on our deficits. We always focus on what we don't have and what's not working. And so my organization, this last one, this is a major focus for us, and it's about the assets. So instead of focusing on what you don't have, focus on the assets that you do have, whether it's human capital, you name it, that you can leverage then to get to your coaching goals in your building. I talk way too much, but you guys were absolutely wonderful to put up with me talking that much for a session. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.